I've had the privilege of being invited by Wrightwood659 to participate in the Architecture for the People exhibit of Balkrishna Doshi's work. The opportunity came in part because I had had the chance to work in Doshi's office, as well as having an architectural practice, Civic Projects, here in Chicago. One of the questions that we felt that was really important was how an architect from India's work that is so humanist in its approach could also have an impact in the context of Chicago, and particularly in the context of Chicago neighborhoods. Through one-on-one conversations with artists, journalists and authors, as well as activists, we reimagined Doshi's work in the contemporary context of Chicago. Natalie Moore, both a journalist and author here in Chicago, reflects on the narrative and the stories of Doshi's practice. We were able to understand the history and context of the work and development that is occurring in Bronzeville in the context and reflections of the work that Doshi is doing here.
This reminds me a little bit of schools in Bronzeville. I think sometimes schools just look so institutional. No windows, very hulking structures, and I'm sure there are issues that people must be wanting schools to have more of a contained feel, but is that the most conducive for learning? And I remember one summer I did a program at North Shore Country Day School because it felt like a campus. I remember being on the lawn and drawing. There was this connection with space and the outdoors. The physical environment felt so different from what I had been experiencing. Reading this makes me think how it doesn't matter where you are in the world, the same principles apply for space and community. It's very transferable. So I would imagine a lot of places where he was in had much more density than what we think about in Chicago neighborhoods outside of the bustling districts. And so how do you create public space that's more than commerce, but having space to play or relax or reflect?
So one of the things that happened after partition is that there was need for new cities, new capitals, new environments. And how do you, in this contemporary environment, think of roots in Indian culture as a way of informing? And how do you integrate the public space, the place to gather? So I think that density and that inhabitation that you talk about, not all of the open space is private. It's a mix of public and private. You may have a courtyard in your home, but then you meet and encounter your neighbors as you move through.
This is a network of open spaces, bringing different backgrounds together, blurs social boundaries. That's not something that I think is working in Chicago. I have found through my living as a city resident and the reporting that a lot of, particularly middle class people and up, want suburban urban living. They don't want interaction. People want to be private and fenced in versus more public facing with their outdoor space.
Because it seems that that liveliness of some of the city and the urban that you've described and we see here wants that spillover, but I understand what you're saying. Culturally, we're much more private.
The open space also raises questions for some about, well, are you loitering? Are you hanging out? If you're under the L train, what are you doing? Like, it's okay if I want to be out and get my goods and services, but I don't want to have interaction with people who I think are poorer than me or aren't in my same socioeconomic class. This is informal. It's not that someone declared or planted a flag. It's just how some of the migration goes. How do you create a network? How do you build community when you have different races, different incomes, where everyone feels welcome?
I think you've just identified the crux of the challenge of so many of our neighborhoods right now.
Everybody should be able to coexist. That you're not taking away something from somebody, and if you're adding something, something's not replacing something. When thinking about placemaking and walkability and livability, there were ideas raised in the exhibit about breaking down social boundaries, and housing is just one piece, but you have to think about jobs and needs that people have. And if you want people to rise economically, what's the pathway for them to do that? You just can't build housing affordable housing or public housing and say, okay, that's it. But that housing, does that change the surrounding neighborhood? Does it change some of the challenges that the neighborhood is facing? So I think all of that has to be integrated within each other. And the good example is the Rosenwald building that got redeveloped and opened in 2017. And public housing didn't even exist in this country when this was built. But this was this massive building that was abandoned and falling apart. But the alderwoman who represents the 3rd Ward wanted to bring people back to the neighborhood for density. And there's a bakery, Abundance Bakery, in the next block. And the owner told me that he had better business when public housing was up because of density. And also, these are not Northside $4 donuts that he's selling. Moms want birthday cakes for their kids. So it flies in the face of conventional wisdom that you have to have upper income people to thrive. And so bringing this building back repopulates the area, it gives affordable housing, and there's retail that's here. But I think it's always a good framework, thinking about these things not just in isolation. What makes a livable city, it doesn't matter where you are. How that is applied or how that manifests itself may be different, but those core questions, it doesn't matter if we're on the south side of Chicago or in a highly dense town outside of a major urban center in India.